is about the changing landscape of SARS-CoV-2 and immunopathology. And as Prof. Karim has already introduced that both of us, Dr. Imam and myself, are both pathologists, and we belong to School of Medicine, Taylor's University. So you can see a picture of Taylor's University here because we have international delegates also who are attending this conference. And besides that, you can see the image of our clinical school, which is located nearby to Sungai Buloh Hospital, which is our main teaching hospital associated with Taylor's University, School of Medicine. And currently this Sungai Buloh Hospital is playing a very vital role looking after the COVID-19 patients in Malaysia. My contents. These are my contents that I will be touching upon. We may not go into many details like we have time constraints, but I'll try to explain most of the things that are listed here. One thing that I would like to make clear that whenever we are using the term SARS-CoV, that is about the SARS coronavirus outbreak in 2003, and SARS-CoV-2 will be dedicated to our current COVID-19 that is going on as a pandemic all over the world. So first of all, I'll introduce to SARS-CoV-2 very briefly. So you all know that severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2 outbreak was first reported in Wuhan, China in December 2019. And of course, until now, it has had an enormous impact on the whole world. Globally, up till now, around 25 million people have, they are the confirmed cases of COVID-19. And we are already familiar with coronavirus because coronavirus has been causing disease outbreaks in the world before, like SARS and MERS. And in case of, COVID-19 disease, it has been observed that around 80% of the patients who are infected with the SARS-CoV-2, they show mild illness, around 80%. However, there is observation that severe illness is seen in around 14% of cases, and 5% of patients have shown critical illness, or they are critically ill. And this group of patients usually belong to the elderly groups, more than 65 years of age, and those patients who have comorbidities like hypertension, like chronic heart disease, like chronic renal disease, like diabetes mellitus, obesity. So these are the people who have comorbidities. They are the ones who mostly fall into this group, who have severe disease and who are critically ill. So the severe form of disease is of major concern to us because it may lead to respiratory failure and failure of many other organs that you will see later on when I will present the immunopathology. So it has been observed that immunopathology plays a major role in the severe form of COVID-19, which is seen in almost 20% of the cases that are being observed in the world. So, a little bit about the pathogen. All of you know that COVID-19 is caused by coronavirus 2. It is a beta coronavirus, and it is a single-stranded RNA virus with membrane and envelope and the spike. Okay, and you must have heard a lot about these spikes because these spikes play a major role in the pathogenicity of this virus. So SARS-CoV-2 genome, if you look at SARS-CoV-2 genome, it shows more similarity to SARS-CoV infection that was seen in 2003 as compared to MERS, because you can see the figure here that it is more similar to SARS-CoV virus, SARS-CoV infection. And SARS-CoV binds to angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptors through its receptor binding domain. And this, this receptor binding domain is present on the spike, it is part of the spike protein. So, it means that the spike protein acts like a key to open the lock of this receptor, and then by opening the lock of this receptor, they gain entry into the cell and then cause infection. So there has been a lot of talk about the polymorphism or the mutations in the virus, but the major mutation in the spike protein is this one, D614G. So initially it was D614. After mutation, it has converted into G614. What does it mean is that there is change in the sequence of amino acids where there is replacement of glycine. So the glycine replaces aspartic acid to convert this D614 into G614. So what are the implications here due to this mutation is that it has increased, because in this picture you can see the magnitude of infection has increased. It means that this mutation has increased the infectivity of this virus. However, as I was going through the literature, I saw that there is almost no effect on the course or the outcome of the disease due to this mutation. Okay, so this slide is telling us about, all of you are familiar about the transmission of SARS-CoV-2. So this picture is showing you the transmission cycle of SARS-CoV-2. And we all are familiar that human-to-human transmission mostly takes place through the droplet infection or through the direct contact. And there's also aerosol transmission, but that aerosol transmission is reserved in case of healthcare workers who are very closely working with the patients of COVID-19. Now I would like to show you a small video clip that will introduce you and make it more clear for you people that how does this virus gains entry into the cells, and then what happens afterwards, and how does it multiply within the cells. So once the virus is transmitted through the droplet spread and enters another person, then the virus will be taken through the nose, and then it will bind to ACE2 receptors, and then it will be internalized inside the cells, in the host cell. And then inside the host cell, instead of becoming part of DNA of the host cell, it acts like part of the ribosome of the host cell. So the ribosome will use the genetic information of the virus to synthesize viral proteins. And once these viral proteins are synthesized, they will be packed in the Golgi apparatus into the small vesicles, and those vesicles containing virus proteins will be assembling underneath the cell membrane and will integrate into the cell membrane, and then a whole virus will just emerge from the cell. So that is how this virus is multiplying in the body. So it is observed that initially, maybe during the initial 1 to 2 days of the infection, the inhaled virus likely binds to epithelial cells in the nasal cavity. But as there is, after a few days, as is progression of the disease and virus propagates and migrates down the respiratory tract, then there will be activation of the innate immune system. So this is the alveolus that you are looking at. Okay, so in this part on the left, you can see that, we all know that there are resident macrophages inside the alveoli, which are also antigen presenting cells. So these antigen presenting cells are going to initiate the innate immune response, followed by an adaptive immune response. So when this adaptive immune response is activated, the T cells which are recruited, they are going to directly kill the virus infected cells, and the B cells recruited will be producing specific virus-specific antibodies, along with cytokine release and recruitment of more inflammatory cells like macrophages and neutrophils. So together, all these responses will cause viral clearance in case of asymptomatic infections and mild infections. But there might be some damage to the host cells that may be causing mild symptoms in the patient at this stage. But I have already talked about that around 20% of patients, they do develop severe infection. So this severe infection can cause damage not only to the lungs, but it can cause damage to the other tissues also. So it has been observed that this tissue damage is caused by an extreme stimulation of the immune response. And that immune response, extreme activation of immune response may lead to lymphopenia, it may lead to cytokine rush, and it may also cause activation of the coagulation system. So in order to understand why this is happening in severe cases of COVID-19, we can look back what had happened in case of SARS infection or SARS outbreak in 2003, and what lessons we can learn from this, those observations that were made at that time. So at that time, it was observed that there was a decrease in the peripheral T cell subsets in SARS outbreak. And those T cell subsets, they recovered when the patient recovered. So they came back to their normal number. So thus, at that time, it was proposed, it was suggested that the peripheral T cell number can serve as an accurate guide, diagnostic tool for SARS. So the same, we have observed that there's also lymphopenia in case of SARS-CoV-2 infection. So in that case, that kind of finding can help us to understand the immunopathology of SARS-CoV-2. So in the next slide, you can see this immunopathology of SARS-CoV-2. So the host immune response appears to play a critical role in the disease pathogenesis and clinical manifestations. So in this picture, you can see that in severe cases, there's lymphopenia. And particularly, there's decrease in the number of CD8 positive T cells, T lymphocytes. Along with that, there's T cell activation. So when there's T cell activation, that will lead to elaboration of cytokines. So there is increase in the level of cytokines. Another phenomena which is observed in the severe infection is that there is lymphocyte dysfunction. So there could be T cell exhaustion, there could be NK cell exhaustion. Along with that, there are also abnormalities in the granulocytes and monocytes. So you can see in this picture that there's increase in the neutrophils. However, there's increase in the number of all other white blood cells, which are important in the immune response. Then there is increased production of cytokines has been observed. You can see that so many cytokines are increased. They are elevated in the system, particularly interleukin-1 beta, interleukin-6, and interleukin-10. And there's also increased production of antibodies. So all the antibodies will be increased. They are elevated, particularly IgG levels are increased. So these findings, which I just mentioned, could be taken as indicators of severe disease and may also help to determine the course of the disease and guide the choice of therapy. So let's see what are the different mechanisms that are causing these immunopathological changes. So in case of depletion and exhaustion of lymphocytes, it is, you can see in this picture that T cells, when the virus attaches to them through ACE2 receptors, there may be impairment of their function. So there's T cell impairment, then there might be destruction of the T cells, so there might be T cell depletion as well as exhaustion due to they are overstimulated and they are producing large amounts of cytokines. Then there could be direct damage to the spleen and lymph nodes that may lead to lymphopenia, and there is increased levels of lactic acid that have been observed in these patients that may also cause T cell impairment and their dysfunction. Coming to the increase of neutrophils, because there is lymphopenia, so that lymphopenia may increase the susceptibility of the patient to microbial infections. So because of the microbial infections, there is activation and recruitment of neutrophils. Coming to this part of the picture, which is known as a cytokine storm, you can see that because there's activation of different types of immunological cells. So all of these cells, when they're activated, they're producing large amounts of cytokine, producing a cytokine storm. And another phenomena which is seen is antibody-dependent enhancement. So it means that antibodies which are being produced, they are beneficial as well as they may have some deleterious effect on the course of the disease, because those antibodies, they facilitate the binding of the virus to the cells, and that may cause disease progress and poor outcome in that particular case. So let's see what are the clinical implications of these mechanisms that I have just described. So the clinical implications could be these two: the effect of lymphopenia on microbiota infection, that because of lymphopenia, there's increased susceptibility to infections, microbial infections, and that will worsen the prognosis for the patient. And there is also cytokine storm. So when there's cytokine storm, that can lead to damage to multiple organs. So particularly lungs. So in the lungs, it can cause ARDS, respiratory failure. The liver damage may be shown by the elevation of the liver enzymes. There could be kidney damage, where we can see elevation of urea and creatinine, and damage to the heart, which is shown by the cardiac markers such as creatine kinase and LDH level, as well as troponin T also has been seen elevated in these patients. So what are so based on these findings and immunopathological changes, the COVID-2 syndrome has been divided into 5 clinical stages. So if you look at the severe stage of the disease, it has got these comorbidities that may happen. It may have CNS effect, it may have GIT effects such as raised liver enzymes, it may have myocardial effects such as raised creatinine kinase and troponin and LDH levels. And in critical illness, you can see that these patients, I have mentioned already that there may be development of acute respiratory distress syndrome, there might be respiratory failure, septic shock, and organ failure, multiple organ failure, which is seen in case of the critical illness and with severe disease. Very briefly, I'll mention about the potential immunotherapeutic strategies. So immunotherapeutic strategies basically are based on these two effects, dependent on the immunopathological effects, that there is lymphopenia. So strategies are, the action is to enhance the lymphocytes. And one of them is using convalescent plasma therapy and also inhibiting the inflammation, because there is dysregulated inflammation. So this inflammatory response, which is causing cytokine storm, the therapies have been taking care of that aspect of COVID-19. Now there are, I'll show you some autopsy findings in case of COVID-19 patients. So finding the autopsy finding is limited because very limited data is available on autopsy findings. I found out this in the Lancet, and it is quite recent also. It was published on August 1. So they saw that grossly the lungs were edematous. They were heavy and edematous. There were hemorrhages in the lung, intraparenchymal hemorrhage, and there is also central pulmonary emboli, as you can see in this picture. And one very important finding that was found at that time, which was observed at that time, that these patients had high plasma D-dimer level, as well as elevated cardiac markers like CK and troponin T at that time. Microscopically, you can see that the microscopy of the lung tissue revealed diffuse alveolar damage. So when there is diffuse alveolar damage, you can well imagine what may be the implication of this diffuse alveolar damage. It will, of course, it will affect the respiratory function. Then there is intraalveolar fibrin and hyaline membrane formation. So when there's diffuse alveolar damage along with the hyaline membrane, you can imagine that how much there will be compromise on the gaseous exchange and the pulmonary function. And then this effect also had some implication if the patient survives, that there's organizing connective tissue. Later on, it may give rise to fibrosis of the lung tissue. And they also found out that, the IHC findings on the macrophages showed that it was positive for SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. Okay, this is immunohistochemistry. So this is a key finding, and it is an evidence that the lung was infected by this virus. Another very important finding is that there is microvascular thrombosis. Okay, so you can well imagine that combination of diffuse alveolar damage, hyaline membranes, and there is also microvascular thrombosis, all combined together may lead to respiratory failure. Then they also found that some changes were also observed in the other tissues. So grossly, they saw these changes in the other tissues, like in the spleen. There were subarachnoid hemorrhages in the brain, hepatic congestion, and changes in the heart and the kidney tissues. And microscopy also of these tissues shows some damage to these tissues. So particularly myocarditis with aggregates of lymphocytes, okay, has been observed. In the spleen, white pulp was depleted. Kidney showed acute tubular injury, and in the liver, central lobular necrosis was also observed. So, and on electron microscopy of these specimens, it was also found that virus particles were present in the lungs, trachea, kidney, and the large intestines. So this is about the autopsy findings. Then to conclude, understanding the mechanisms underlying the immune change or the immunopathology in the severe disease is important for guiding therapeutic strategies. Okay. And then there are some indicators of severe infections, like I have shown you in the slide. Indicators of severe infection could be lymphopenia, abnormalities of T cell function, excessive production of cytokines and chemical mediators, high neutrophil count, high IgG level, and elevated plasma D-dimer concentrations in conjunction with elevated cardiac markers. So this is what we can look for if we are following the patients to see that what is the stage of the disease in a particular patient. So these are my references, and thank you very much for your kind listening and patient listening. I'm sorry if some of you were not able to follow the terminologies that I have been using. So I'm really sorry if you were not able to follow, but thank you so much for giving your time to me.